Hi, I'm Emma Carter, and this is the story of how I poured everything I had, my time, my energy, my life, into a company I didn't even name, only to be told I would never be good enough to lead it. It's the story of how I walked away with nothing and came back holding everything. But let's start at the beginning, when none of us had anything but a dusty little warehouse and a dream. Our family business, Carter and Sons Logistics, was born from my grandfather's post-war hustle and my father's relentless work ethic. It started as a local courier service with 2 trucks and a phone line that rang maybe twice a day. By the time I was in high school, it had grown into a small but steady logistics company that served regional clients, mostly warehouses and small retailers. From the outside, it looked like a true family success story. But from the inside, it was a kingdom built for my brother, Noah. Noah was the eldest, the golden boy. Dad used to say he had business in his blood, just like his father. He was outgoing, charismatic, and always knew what to say in a room full of important men. I, on the other hand, was the planner. The one who spent nights buried in spreadsheets and route optimization models while Noah played golf with potential partners. When I graduated with a dual degree in supply chain management and information systems, I had big dreams for the company. I didn't want to take it over. I wanted to build it into something new. I wanted to make it smarter, faster, and leaner. Dad didn't understand most of what I said in those early days. Why fix something that isn't broken? He'd grumble as I proposed implementing automated systems and data analytics tools. But he let me experiment. Mostly because I didn't ask for much. Just a quiet desk in the back corner of the office and permission to test a few ideas. And those ideas worked. In year 1, I helped cut costs by 18% by reworking our routing systems. In year 2, I led a complete digital transformation, switching from paper logs and whiteboards to cloud-based fleet tracking. By year 4, we had contracts with 2 national retailers. 10 years in, we had grown from a $3 million operation to a $60 million logistics powerhouse. But no matter how much we grew, or how many problems I solved, I never stopped being the helper. The girl behind the curtain. The one who made things work, but never stood on stage. Noah had left for a few years, trying and failing to launch his own startup, and only came back when the company was too big to ignore. I still remember the day he walked into the office again like he had never left. Everyone welcomed him with open arms. Dad hugged him like he was returning from war. And just like that, he was given an office and a title. Vice President of Business Development. I bit my tongue. After all, maybe he'd changed. But he hadn't. He took credit for deals I closed, spoke over me in meetings, and made subtle jabs about how I was great with numbers, but not much of a leader. I kept quiet. I figured the work would speak for itself. But I was wrong. The real blow came on a quiet Saturday evening, Dad's 60th birthday. We were having dinner at the old family restaurant, the kind with red leather booths and the same waiter who had served us since I was a kid. It was just family and a few close business associates. I had a feeling something was coming. Dad had hinted at a big announcement. When dessert was served, Dad stood up and tapped his glass. He talked about legacy, about how Carter and Sons had weathered storms, grown through grit, and become a true success. I smiled, expecting maybe a shared title, or at least an acknowledgement. But then he said it. "It's time to pass the torch to the next generation," Dad beamed, "and there's no one better suited to lead us into the future than Noah." I blinked. The words didn't register at first. "From this day forward," he continued, "Noah will be stepping in as CEO. I'll remain as chairman, but the future belongs to my son." There was no mention of me. Not a word. I sat there in silence, my fork resting on my untouched slice of cake. I glanced around the table. Noah, smug. My aunt, nodding proudly. My mom, tight-lipped and quiet as always. And then Dad turned to me. "Emma," he said, "you'll still have your role in operations. But leadership, it's not really your strength. You're a workhorse, reliable, but not a visionary." And then the line that burned into my memory forever, You'll never be good enough to run this company." The table fell silent. No one said a word. I stood up slowly, tucked my napkin on the table, and gave a soft nod. "Thanks for the clarity," I said. And I walked out. No shouting, no dramatic scene. Just quiet dignity and 1,000 thoughts racing through my head. That night, I packed up my office. I didn't tell anyone. I just left. But I didn't disappear. I went to build something of my own. And 5 years later, I'd return in a way none of them saw coming. Because sometimes the people you underestimate the most are the ones who come back holding the keys to everything you once thought was yours. The night I walked out of that birthday dinner, the air outside felt colder than usual. Not because of the weather, but because something in me had frozen. That moment at the table wasn't just a betrayal. It was a realization, a breaking point. My whole life, I thought if I worked hard enough, proved myself over and over, they'd see me. Really see me. But they never would. Noah didn't have to earn his crown. He was born with it. I, on the other hand, could have tripled the company's value again, and it still wouldn't have been enough. Not for my father. Not for the people who saw me as just the help. So I didn't cry that night. I didn't scream or beg. I drove home in silence, pulled out a bottle of wine, and sat in the dark living room with only my laptop for company. I stared at the Carter & Sons logo glowing on my desktop. A logo I helped design. A brand I had nurtured for a decade. And then I created a new folder. Project Phoenix. That night, I laid the foundation of what would one day rise from the ashes they left me in. The next morning, I returned to the office. Not for revenge. Not yet. I needed information. I moved quietly, backing up files I had legal rights to, financial reports I had authored, vendor contacts I had built relationships with. I even took photos of the whiteboards in our planning rooms, blueprints I'd spent years perfecting. I resigned officially 2 days later. No grand announcement, just a brief letter on Dad's desk. "Thank you for the opportunity. I wish the company continued success." That was it. Dad never responded. Noah sent a one-line email that simply said, "Best of luck out there." I don't even think he meant it. What they didn't know was that I wasn't heading out into the wilderness unarmed. Over the years, I had built trust, real trust with our clients. Not because of my last name, but because I showed up when shipments were late. Because I answered my phone at midnight when things went wrong. Because I solved problems no one else would even touch. So when I made my first few calls, the conversations went better than I could have imagined. "Wait, you're leaving? Are you starting something new?" "Emma, if you're building your own thing, we want in." One client turned into 3, then 5. Within a month, I had 12 verbal commitments from companies who were tired of being treated like numbers and missed the level of care they only ever got from me. I filed paperwork for my new company, True North Freight Systems. The name mattered to me. I didn't want another Carter and something. I wanted something that pointed forward. Something that said, "This is where I go now." I started small. Just me, a leased office above a coffee shop, and a whiteboard full of ideas. I didn't have the Carter name behind me anymore. I didn't have a team. I didn't have money either. But I had something more powerful. A reputation. I cashed in my savings, sold my car, got a small business loan. I partnered with a software developer I'd worked with in the past and started building my own logistics platform. Something smarter, more adaptive, built on everything I'd learned at Carter & Sons but could never fully implement there because Dad thought it was too complicated. The first 6 months were brutal. I worked 16-hour days, took every meeting, cold-called suppliers, delivered presentations in rooms full of skeptical men who thought I'd crumble without a family name to fall back on. But every time someone looked at me like I didn't belong, it just fueled me more. "You don't look like someone who runs a freight company," one exec said with a condescending smile. "That's funny," I replied, "because I built one." By the end of year 1, we had broken even. By the end of year 2, we were profitable. Year 3? We'd landed a contract with a national e-commerce brand that Noah once tried, and failed to win over. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. Not really. It was about proving something to myself. That I could do it. Without their approval. Without the Carter legacy. But the thing is, success has a way of attracting attention. And somewhere around year 4, my quiet little company started showing up on industry radar. People noticed how fast we were growing, how many of our clients had once been loyal to Carter and Sons, and eventually, so did Noah. That's when I got the first phone call. "Hey, Emma," he said, in that overly casual tone I knew too well. "Been hearing a lot about your company. Congrats on the growth." I paused. "Thanks, Noah. Didn't expect to hear from you." "Yeah, well, Dad and I were thinking, maybe it's time we reconnect. Grab coffee sometime?" I smiled. Not because I missed them, but because I realized something. They could see the storm coming, and had no idea how to stop it. I didn't need coffee. I needed patience. Because I was about to do something bigger than just succeed. I was going to teach them what it feels like to be underestimated. By the time Noah called me, 4 years had passed since that birthday dinner. 4 years since I walked away from Carter and Sons with nothing but my knowledge, my contacts, and the weight of being told I'd never be good enough. But now, I had something they hadn't counted on. Momentum. True North was becoming a serious contender. We weren't just surviving. We were outperforming. Clients raved about our speed, our transparency, and our cutting-edge tracking system. Even the way we treated our drivers was being praised in industry blogs. What made it all the sweeter was knowing I didn't have a single penny of Carter and Sons money in my pocket. Every dollar we earned was built from the ground up. That call from Noah? It wasn't just curiosity. It was fear disguised as friendly interest. "We've been thinking of expanding west," he said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Could be an opportunity for collaboration." I didn't bite. "We're already there," I replied calmly. "But thanks for the offer." "Oh," he stammered. "Well, good for you." What he didn't realize was that while he was busy trying to impress the board with expansion plans and buzzwords, I was quietly acquiring influence. You see, logistics is a game of relationships, and relationships, when nurtured with real trust, become loyalty. Over the last 2 years, several former Carter and Sons clients had switched to True North. Not in anger, not because I asked, but because they wanted to. And some of those clients were very important. But the most interesting shift was happening quietly on the corporate side. Behind the scenes, Carter and Sons had entered into a series of strategic partnerships, one of which included a large, publicly traded parent company, Weston Holdings. It was meant to be a move that would stabilize their growth, open new markets, and bring investor capital. What Dad and Noah didn't realize was how vulnerable that made them. Because Weston Holdings, they were in trouble. And they were looking to sell off some underperforming logistics assets, which included, you guessed it, Carter and Sons. I heard about it through a mutual connection, someone who used to work with Noah but had since joined our team. "They think Weston's going to restructure," he said, leaning against my office door. "Carter and Sons is on the chopping block." At first, I wasn't sure what to do with that information. Was I really going to step back into the world I'd worked so hard to escape? The same world that had tossed me aside? But then I remembered the look on Dad's face that night. The pride in his voice when he handed everything over to Noah. The way he called me reliable, but not a leader. And I realized something. This wasn't about revenge. This was about truth. It was about proving that leadership isn't about being handed a title. It's about what you do when no one's watching. The hours no one sees. The trust you build. The grit. So I made a few calls. And then a few more. Within a week, I was sitting in a quiet, glass-walled conference room with the executive board of Weston Holdings. I wore a navy blue suit. No logo. No flash. Just me and a proposal. "We'd like to acquire Carter and Sons in full," I said calmly, sliding the portfolio across the table. "We're prepared to absorb their debt, maintain all active contracts, and offer retention bonuses to key staff. One of the executives raised an eyebrow. You don't think there'll be complications, given your history? On the contrary, I replied, a small smile playing at my lips. I think my history is exactly why this will work. After an hour of negotiation, we reached an agreement in principle. Due diligence would take time, but the path was clear. Carter & Sons was now on a leash, and I was the one holding it. I didn't announce it right away. I let the ink dry. Let the press releases prepare. Let the board inform Dad and Noah. And then, finally, on a rainy Thursday morning, I received a simple 2-line email from Weston's legal team. Transaction closed. Welcome to the team. I stared at it for a moment. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm, grounded, like a weight had finally lifted. The girl they said would never be good enough had just bought the company that once pushed her aside. And the best part? They had no idea I was coming. The next morning, I walked into Carter & Sons headquarters for the first time in 5 years. Same walls, same coffee machine, same framed photo of Dad shaking hands with the mayor, hung crooked in the lobby. The receptionist did a double take. Can I help you? Yes, I said, smiling warmly. Could you let Mr. Carter know his new boss would like a word? Her mouth dropped open just slightly, but she reached for the phone. I stood there, heart steady, hands relaxed. Because the fun part? That was still to come. The elevator ride to the top floor of Carter & Sons felt surreal. I had taken that ride hundreds of times in the past, usually with a coffee in one hand and a to-do list in the other. Back then, I was the fixer, the one who slipped in quietly, solved problems, and left without fanfare. But today, I wasn't here to fix anything. I was here to take what I had already earned. The doors slid open with a soft chime, and I stepped out into a hallway I knew like the back of my hand. It was strange. Everything looked exactly the same. Same carpet, same flickering overhead light that no one had ever bothered to replace. But the energy? That had changed. I walked straight to the executive conference room, and they were already there. Dad, Noah, 2 board members who used to ignore me in meetings, and the company lawyer whose smile faltered the second he saw me. Dad stood up, clearly rattled. Emma, what is this? Why didn't anyone tell me you were coming? I set my bag down at the head of the table and took a seat. No hesitation, no invitation. I didn't need one anymore. You're here because we have some important things to discuss, I said evenly, and I thought it best we do it face to face. Noah scoffed. What, you're some kind of consultant now? Coming in to poke holes in the company you abandoned? I met his gaze calmly. No, Noah, I'm not a consultant. I'm your boss. The silence that followed was so thick it felt like the oxygen had left the room. Dad's face went pale. What are you talking about? I leaned back in my chair and slid a document across the table. The acquisition agreement. Signed, sealed, irrefutable. Weston Holdings sold their logistics assets, including Carter & Sons. The purchase was finalized yesterday. The parent company is now True North Freight Systems. Dad's hands trembled as he picked up the paper. You bought us? Yes, I said simply. Every truck, every contract, every office, all of it. Noah sprang to his feet. You're lying. This is some kind of joke. You don't have that kind of power. You should really stop underestimating me, I said, my voice still calm. That mistake already cost you the company. He looked at Dad, but Dad said nothing. Just stared down at the paper in his hand like it was written in a foreign language. 5 years ago, I continued, you told me I'd never be good enough to run this company, so I left. I started something of my own. And while you were busy chasing deals and polishing your image, I was building something real. I looked at both of them. You didn't just hand me a reason to leave. You handed me the motivation to become unstoppable. Noah finally sat down, clearly shaken. So what now? You want revenge? I shook my head. I want order. Effective immediately, Carter and Sons will begin a full integration into True North. There will be leadership changes, departmental reviews, and likely some reassignments. But no, this isn't about revenge. I didn't come back to burn it down. I came back to build it properly. Dad finally spoke, his voice low. You waited all this time, just to humiliate us. No, Dad, I said, looking him directly in the eye. I waited all this time so I could do it right. You taught me to be patient, to think before I act. You just didn't realize that lesson would one day come back to you. He sat back in his chair, speechless, maybe for the first time in his life. Then I turned to Noah. You'll be reporting to me from now on, and if that's a problem, there's the door. His jaw clenched. You think you're better than me now? No, I said softly. I always was. You just couldn't see it through the lens of your own entitlement. There it was, the truth, spoken aloud in the very room where I had once been silenced, minimized, overlooked. And now? Now I held the floor. After the meeting, I walked the halls of the company I once helped grow from spreadsheets and sleepless nights. Employees peeked out of offices, eyes wide. Some whispered. Others just watched, frozen in quiet disbelief. I paused at my old office, the one they had cleared out for Noah when he returned. It still had the same worn leather chair, the same view of the city skyline. I didn't feel bitter. I felt ready. Ready to lead. Ready to heal. Ready to show them all what real leadership looked like. Because what they had tried to take from me wasn't just a job or a title. It was my identity. And now I was reclaiming it. On my terms. The quiet girl who used to stay late fixing routing software? She now owned the keys to the entire building. And this was just the beginning. Taking over Carter and Sons wasn't the victory it looked like from the outside. Sure, there were congratulations from board members who'd once ignored me. Polite nods from employees who used to walk past me without a word. And even headlines in the industry press. Rising freight star acquires former industry giant. But inside the walls of that office, the atmosphere was tense. People weren't just surprised. I think some were afraid. Afraid of what I'd do now that I had power. Afraid I'd become a version of Noah. Ego-driven, vindictive, petty. They didn't know me, not really. So on my first official day as CEO, I didn't give a dramatic speech. I didn't change the name on the door or fire anyone on the spot. Instead, I sent a company-wide email. One line, meet me in the warehouse at 8:30 a.m. No chairs, no suits, no filters. When I walked in, the entire company, from truck drivers to accountants to senior managers, stood there, waiting. I stepped onto a wooden crate, took a deep breath, and spoke. I know this transition has come as a shock. I know some of you have questions. I know some of you may even feel loyalty to the leadership that was here before, and that's okay. But here's what I want you to know. I didn't come back to destroy this place. I came back to save it. The truth is, Carter and Sons has been struggling. Bloated costs, inefficient systems, high turnover, missed opportunities. You all know it. You've lived it. And still, you stayed. You showed up. You kept the wheels turning. That tells me you care. From now on, this company will be built on 3 things: innovation, integrity, and respect. We will earn back the trust of our clients, not with slogans, but with results. And if you're willing to work, to adapt, and to believe in what's possible, then I promise you, we will rise again. Silence at first. Then someone clapped. Then more. Until the warehouse echoed with the sound of applause. Not thunderous, but steady. Real. And that was enough. In the weeks that followed, I made good on my promises. The first thing I did was audit every department. Not to punish, but to understand. I held one-on-one meetings with every team leader, including the night shift dispatcher who'd been there since my internship days. I restored benefits that had been cut under Noah's leadership. I rewrote the driver bonus system to reward consistency, not just volume. And I reopened the innovation lab I'd pitched years ago that Dad had shut down, calling it a waste of money. One afternoon, while going through old budget records, I found a note I'd written in the margins of a proposal. If they gave me the chance, I could triple our efficiency in 18 months. I smiled, because now, I didn't need permission. Noah, meanwhile, floundered. He had accepted the reporting role begrudgingly, hoping to weather the storm until he could maneuver his way back up. But power built on ego collapses quickly when the foundation shifts. The staff stopped running to him for answers. Clients started requesting me by name. Vendors who once tolerated his demands now sent messages like, "So glad to see Emma back. Let us know how we can support the new direction." And Dad? He didn't come into the office for the first 2 weeks. When he finally did, he barely made eye contact. He looked older, smaller, like a man who had seen everything he built change hands overnight and couldn't admit it was his own fault. We spoke only briefly. "You've changed," he said one afternoon, standing in the doorway of my office. "No," I replied. "You just never saw who I really was." He looked at the floor, then back at me. "You were always good at the work. I just didn't think you had the stomach for leadership." "Maybe," I said. "You were confusing silence with weakness. Or grace with passivity." He didn't respond, just nodded slowly and left. And that was the last real conversation we had. A month later, I signed a deal that brought in the largest client the company had ever landed, something Noah had chased for years. The contract came with a 5-year commitment and a projected revenue boost of $22 million annually. At the signing ceremony, the client's CEO shook my hand and said, "We've followed your career for a while, Emma. We like the way you lead. Quiet strength, decisive moves. It's rare." And that's when I realized I never needed to shout to be heard. I just needed to stop waiting for permission. What my father and brother never understood is that the real power doesn't come from a title or a name on the door. It comes from knowing who you are and staying true to that even when no one else sees your worth. Because the ones they ignore, the ones they label as not good enough, we're the ones who show up early, who work late, who remember every crack in the foundation because we built it brick by brick. And when the time comes, we're the ones who rebuild it better. A year passed. Then 2. Under my leadership, Carter and Sons wasn't just repaired, it was reinvented. We restructured operations, rolled out predictive AI routing, expanded into international freight, and launched a green logistics initiative that slashed emissions and won us 3 major sustainability awards. The company that once dismissed me for being too operational was now being invited to speak on panels about innovation and female leadership in male-dominated industries. But success wasn't the loudest part of my return. Silence was. I didn't parade around the office waving my title. I didn't rub anything in. I didn't need to. Because the people who used to overlook me now looked to me for direction. They respected me not because I demanded it, but because I had earned it. And as for Noah, he lasted another 9 months before he stepped down. He said it was to pursue other opportunities. But the truth was simpler. Leadership isn't something you inherit. It's something you embody. And once the glitter of his name faded, people saw the truth. Without someone cleaning up after him, he couldn't lead. He left quietly. No dramatic farewell, no send-off. Just a box of things and a door that didn't swing back open. Dad never officially retired, but he stopped coming in. I think part of him couldn't handle walking through a building that now reflected my vision, not his. We speak occasionally, mostly on holidays. It's polite, distant. Like we're family by name, but not by soul. Once, during Thanksgiving, we sat across from each other at the long family table. the clatter of silverware and soft laughter filling the gaps between our words. He finally leaned over and said, "I didn't think you had it in you, but you proved me wrong." I didn't reply, because I didn't do this to prove anything to him. I did it to reclaim the part of myself that was buried under years of being dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated. True North, the company I had started above a coffee shop, still existed, stronger than ever. I had installed a trusted COO to run daily operations, and it continued to grow alongside Carter and Sons. But now they weren't competitors. They were allies under the same vision, a shared empire, and I was at the helm. Last week, I stood on the stage of a logistics summit as the keynote speaker. Hundreds of people in the audience. The backdrop behind me. The future is female, innovating in a changing industry. Funny, isn't it? 5 years ago, I couldn't even get a seat at the boardroom table. Now I was being asked to teach others how to lead. As I spoke, I didn't tell them the flashy parts. I didn't boast about acquisitions or revenue. I told them the truth. I was told I wasn't good enough, that I didn't have vision, that I was too quiet, too cautious, too technical. And maybe I was all of those things. But the quiet ones? We see everything. We remember. And when we rise, we don't just take power. We transform it. Leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about listening, understanding, building something that can't be taken away because it's rooted in purpose. The applause that followed wasn't just for the speech. It was for every woman, every person who had ever been told they weren't enough. And then came the moment that felt like a full circle. A woman approached me after the speech. Late 30s, sharp eyes, nervous smile. "I'm in the middle of a family business transition," she said quietly. "They're giving it to my brother. I've done everything right, but it doesn't matter." I looked at her and smiled gently. "Build your own," I said. "And when they least expect it, come back and buy theirs." Sometimes life doesn't give you the apology you deserve. Sometimes people never say, "I'm sorry." But that's okay. Because the most powerful apology isn't words. It's recognition. It's the look in their eyes when they finally understand what they lost. It's the silence after the storm you didn't start, but finished. The truth is, I don't hate my father, and I don't envy my brother. I wish things had been different. I wish they had believed in me from the start. But then again, if they had, I might never have become who I am. And I love who I've become. A builder, a leader, a woman who took what was meant to break her and used it as fuel to rise. So if you're watching this and wondering if it's too late to take back what they stole from you, it's not. Start small. Start quiet. But start. Because someday they'll look up, and you'll be the one at the head of the table.